Hey, everybody. Fascinating discussion today on the future of AI regulation and ethics, compliance, and beyond with a true expert in the field from Wolters Kluwer. Suzanne, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Evan?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for being here. Really fascinated by your mission and team within Wolters Kluwer. For those of us who may not be that familiar with your organization, maybe start with some introductions to the
Yeah,
company and your role within.
yeah, sure. I've worked for Wolters Kluwer for 4.5 years, and Wolters Kluwer is a global provider of information and software solutions for serving professionals for in sectors such as finance, healthcare, and legal professionals. I'm managing legal counsel here and regulatory lawyer for Wolters Kluwer. So I'm specialised in interpreting and advising on new regulatory initiatives and laws impacting our industry. And that includes, of course, artificial intelligence. And in particular, I've been following the passage of the European Artificial Intelligence Act, along with developments in the AI regulatory space with a lot of interest. Most recently, I completed the Oxford AI programme, and that provided all sorts of insights into this fast developing area, including the technologies behind AI and its social and ethical implications. And so I find it a super interesting and relevant area as a lawyer and as somebody that watches the news and sees all these exciting developments from the technology companies. And I do think used responsibly, AI provides huge benefits to our economy and society. So it's great to be here and great to have the opportunity to discuss with you.
Yeah, likewise. And it is a fascinating time, huge opportunities, huge risks and challenges, though, in navigating the AI legal implications and landscape. Maybe talk about that. But what's top of mind to your clients and internally these days around AI and some of the top issues facing different industries?
Yeah, no, it's a hugely interesting question. Well, I'm sure as most people are aware, we now have the European Artificial Intelligence Act, and that's really been brought in with a huge, fanfare that it's a comprehensive law regulating artificial intelligence in Europe. I suppose firstly I would say it's not regulating artificial intelligence per se, because we're not talking about general artificial intelligence here. We're talking about the regulation of AI systems. And that was something that it actually took the regulator in Europe a long time to get a definition on, what is AI, what is an AI system? And that has developed over the years that they've been thoughtfully engaging with the tech industry and with academics and technical experts and lawyers from something that originally might have included a calculator in scope and traditional computing to something that now an AI system, it infers. It's machine-based and it infers with varying degrees of autonomy from the input it receives, the output. So it's quite clearly targeted to machine learning, supervised, unsupervised, reinforcement, and your deep learning. And the other thing, the hiatus as we were going along through the various institutions about negotiating the EU AI Act was, okay, it's now 2022. We had an act that was going to be a product-based regulation. So really it was going to be around regulating lifts, elevators, aeroplanes, medical devices, and then particularly focused at use cases where it would affect individuals, such as recruitment and employment decisions, automated decisions around those. And that was all set out in the Act with AI systems, everybody almost at agreement at what those were. And then we had ChatGPT, which exploded onto the collective consciousness in 2022. So then they had to go almost back to the drawing board and say, okay, we kind of need to regulate this too, because they were acknowledging that these exciting new general purpose technologies were exactly that, general purpose. And the industry participants were keenly exploring, innovating around how to put their API on top of the general purpose AI to create their own products. So they really had to think quite thoughtfully about the AI value chain of the developer, the provider, the deployer, and who came afterwards in terms of selling down the chain, in terms of what their responsibilities would be. And that's where we saw significant engagement with the tech industry as well, as to, from their perspective, what is a general purpose AI model, what is a general purpose AI system, and what they felt should be within the scope of regulation and what they felt was too prescriptive. And that was where we saw a lot of engagement from the American tech companies about the extent to which they should be regulated. So I think, just to kind of encapsulate the first part of my thoughts on the EU AI Act, it has been thoughtfully developed as we've gone along. It's got a bit more refined here and there. Sure, it's a new regulation, so we're going to see some bumps along the way. But I think that the large international companies particularly are very used to working in different markets with different regulations. And I think that this one in time will get there and it will evolve. I mean, at the moment, we're waiting for guidance on what is high risk, and we're waiting for further guidance for the general purpose AI system. So it's an exciting space to be in, for sure.
Yeah, right at the cutting edge of what's happening. So what are some of the main challenges, or I guess even benefits perhaps for, US multinationals, the big tech companies operating the EU? What's your take on what they should be particularly aware of?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose I'm not an economist, but I mean, the European market is 440 million consumers. So that's rather inviting, and it is a highly educated and wealthy market. So I don't think that talk of I'm not going to enter that market as a whole is particularly going to happen. I think that it can be a key political manoeuvring in order to make yourself heard as to how you feel that the regulation should progress and the guidelines should progress. I think in some ways it will make things easier, because if you think about Europe, it's 27 member states with 24 different languages. Yes, and so if each of them have their own AI regulations, their own AI laws, you're going to have to know, I mean, great news for lawyers, isn't it? You're going to have to know every single market's laws on AI. So, I mean, that Europe really did want to get this as a super national regulation that would be directly effective in all 27 member states, because that way there's a certain sense of harmony, not just for people who are coming within Europe to Europe, but also for Europeans that are wanting to sell their goods into other member states. So, I mean, it's called an EU AI Act, but the other thing I would criticise about it is it seems fashionable to call things an act at the moment, but it's a regulation, which means it's directly effective in every member state. So I think that it's going to be a huge benefit. And the other thing, I don't feel that we're all that much at odds with a lot of conversations that are going on around the world. It wasn't as if the EU created this act in a bubble. There's been a lot of engagement with officials in Washington, with international figures around the world, with academics, to really come up with a notion of what is it that we're setting the guardrails for? What is important for the development of AI? And so you see internationally that there are certain overarching principles that are always the same, so safety and robustness. You will hear that from the Biden administration. Security, privacy, transparency. These are all important responsible AI principles, and they're important. They're important for society, of course, because we're always going to get bad actors, but they're also important for uptake, for people having faith in trustworthy AI. And I think the principles are something which worldwide we're seeing that companies are adopting the same important overarching or very similar overarching concepts and guardrails for which they will start their operations, and then they'll build on those with an AI assurance framework. And the AI assurance framework, there's already some jolly good ones out there. So the NIST one from the US government is really, a splendid framework. And a lot of organizations are starting to use that now. And then it would be a matter of mapping that against the requirements that apply to you in the EU AI Act, and then looking at, internationally with the soft laws and voluntary codes that we're seeing. There was one the other week from Australia. Actually, a bit of comfort that a lot of the things in there are the same. Sure, the EU is a bit more prescriptive, and you may have to, depending on your AI, get it registered. But it's not that it's completely different. I'm seeing a harmonization internationally, which I think is very encouraging for companies, because at the end of the day, you want certainty. And I think with the transparent legal framework in the EU, that will be what we get once this is all settled down.
Interesting. And as far as preparing for compliance with the EU AI Act, how are you advising your clients to get ready?
Well, within Wolters Kluwer, and really for any organisation, because I speak to a lot of different organisations in the market, because I think it's important not just to monitor laws in a legal sense, but also in a functional sense, to see, how they will apply to the AI that you're developing. And so I think it's important to not say, hey, I'm a company, I want to do AI, but to, have a use case where you feel that you're really helping, because we know AI can be fantastic for augmenting processes, workflows, and augmenting the professional. And I think that's where we see that it adds value, because it really should be about being human-centric AI. So I think the first thing as an organization is to have a look at, well, what AI systems do you come within the definition of an AI system, first of all, because not all AI is regulated under the EU AI Act. In fact, a lot of it won't be at all. Natural language processing and some other forms of AI don't fall within the scope. So I think the first thing is look at the AI system. Do you fall within that definition? And then if you do, have a look at, are you producing something which is subject to an existing EU safety regulation, such as a medical device or structures for aeroplanes, which is quite comforting when you think about it, isn't it? You want a regulation around the use of AI in something you're flying in. So look at the product safety side that I mentioned before, and then look at the use cases, because the other side of the regulation for AI systems is where it has an impact on individuals, and that's what the EU is caring about there. That's where it started from. Safety regulation for things that you'd really want to be regulated, and use cases where it's affecting and impacting on an individual. So if you're going for promotion, you're going for recruitment, then you want to know that an automated decision isn't being made about you using AI. Another example is you want to know that the judge isn't making a decision based on ChatGPT. So there are areas that are high risk. And then at the top of the scale, there are some AI systems that within Europe are prohibited, or going to be prohibited in February, so 6 months from the entering into force last year of the EU AI Act. And those are prohibited because they're felt to be completely distasteful to the European values. So they call them fundamental values, but I think you can see similarities with some of the values within the US Constitution and the values around, democracy and freedom of speech and so on. And so an example of that would be subliminal AI. We don't want to suddenly find that we like popcorn when we don't, or whatever. That's a harmless example, but you can imagine that could be used in more nefarious ways. Encouraging unsafe behaviours in particularly vulnerable people like children or people that are less able. So they have thought about areas where you wouldn't want to be developing AI. So there wouldn't be many companies that would be looking at the EU AI Act, I would hope, and say, oh my gosh, it's prohibited. That's my whole business up in the air. So there are a few prohibited. And then, as I said, on the high risk, map whether you fall within high risk for those areas. And then, of course, there's a slightly different regime that applies if you are one of the big tech companies and you have a general purpose AI model. And there it falls within rules for general purpose models. And then there's also those that they've identified as having systemic risk. So it's, I think
a lot to unpack. Fascinating. And big debate on keeping AI regulations relevant amidst all this change. Of course, in the US, we have the California example happen so quickly. So how do you see the regulators balancing, innovation versus regulation?
Well, firstly, it appears in every single speech by a regulator, doesn't it? So they're very keenly aware that they can't stifle innovation. That this can be something which AI is incredibly exciting, and if it's used responsibly and it's used widely, then it really can, change society for the better and improve our economies. But you're absolutely right. You do have to have this balance, don't you? You have to have the buy-in so that people won't say, I'm not going to go into that market at all. And I think the balance depends also culturally, and it depends also on the setup of the laws. So if we take the example of, and I'll start with a caveat to my very experienced US lawyers in the company that, of course, know much more than an English qualified lawyer. But my feelings when I look at the laws in the US, there is a very pro technology. There is a very pro, we don't want to stifle innovation. And so they've taken a bit of an approach that AI is agnostic, which is true, it's agnostic. So it's used across all industries. So it's not that it's completely unregulated now. It's not that, we're in the Wild West and, oh my goodness, we've got the AI regulations, so everything's going to be okay. It was already subject to sectorial regulation. And so I think what we're seeing in the US is that states are looking at what they've already got and seeing how they can enhance what they've got. And the Federal Trade Commission is taking the same approach. And that's another approach. So we're seeing a focus in the US, for example. Illinois amended its Human Rights Act to add some employment and automated decisions on employment. Very similar, of course, to the EU AI Act in that regard, for protection of the protected classes of potential employees. New York has a law which is related to that. So we're seeing all these laws popping up in the US. Some of them don't make it through, such as, the example you said in US. I think there was the comment that it was a thoughtful piece of legislation, but that because it was focused on systemic risk and large models, it wouldn't adapt to the environment and perhaps give a false sense of security because there are a lot of smaller models out there. So, I think everybody's feeling their way. There are gaps in the EU AI Act where there's going to be additional guidelines because they want to kind of keep an element of flexibility. I think it's one of those where you could be a politician and say history will show. But certainly in the definition of an AI system, that's now pretty universal. So the one used in the EU AI Act is the same as the one used by the OECD, of which the US is a signatory. And we see that definition is being used in some of the laws that are coming through in the US as well. So, thank goodness we've all got the same notion of what an AI system is. So I remain very, very positive and upbeat about it. I think it's tough, but tough doesn't mean that you shouldn't regulate, because I think there's been people saying for a while that we needed some sort of guardrails.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, different states are enacting their own regulations. That can be a little chaotic at times, of course, but that's our system. How does that work in Europe in terms of different countries, regions enacting their own regulations? And how are they doing it differently?
Yeah. Well, the EU saw that there was a couple of member states that were starting to think about doing their own artificial intelligence regulations and laws, and it didn't want that because of the reason I said, that you want to have a unified approach to make your market more attractive, both internally and externally to people coming into your market. So that was one aspect. They kind of squashed that and said, no, we don't want that. But I think for anyone coming into Europe, it's not every single law that's agreed at the European level, because every member state reserves the right to have deviations in some respects, but in terms of, for example, its own national security, in terms of its own employment law. So we get two kinds of laws coming through Europe. You get regulations like the EU AI Act, which directly apply. And then you get local laws. And then at the European level, you also get directives. And directives sort of give a guideline for the countries, but they can gold plate them. So, in the same way that US lawyers are incredibly accomplished and experienced in working through different states and the different state laws in which they operate, we have to do a bit of the same in Europe. We have some at a European higher supranational level, and we have some at a local level. And there will be some that are very particular depending on the industry.
Interesting. So as a lawyer, I'm sure you're always looking at emerging legal questions as well. Um, any AI trends in the legal profession or in your personal practice team that are worth mentioning? And how are you thinking about the ethical questions about AI in your work, and maybe even using some of these tools today yourself?
Yeah. Well, we have a legal and regulatory division, and they're very thoughtfully looking at how they can use AI to augment our professional customers' processes. And it is about augmenting the professional, both at law and sensibly. It's about improving processes. And I think there are some areas where there are tremendous capabilities that can be used. They're really exciting. I mean, I give an example of years ago, and I was in the mergers and acquisitions department training, and I had to go through boxes and boxes and boxes of documentation and record what the break clauses were for contracts for all of them, and put them into a sheet and what have you, which is great because you're reading the whole contract in some cases and you're learning from it, but it's very dull work. And things like that can be done accurately and quickly by AI, and then that gives you the freedom and the time to really concentrate on the higher intellectually stimulating areas of your work. So I think for lawyers that there are a lot of areas for improvement, definitely. Yeah, in terms of how AI can augment and help the professional in their work. So I mean, I'm really excited about what a legal and regulatory division is going to be coming up with. We have our AI lab, and we're doing a lot of innovative work, but it's always thoughtfully because we work with professionals. So we want to make sure that we get it right and we make it better for them.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Legal tech is one of the hottest tech trends these days in AI. So who would have thought one of the oldest professions would be at the forefront of what's
That's
happening
so
with
right. Because they
startups and
knew,
investment?
because they
Yes,
used
lots
to
of
say
work to
it was
be
going to
done.
be the blue collar workers, didn't they? That was going to be replaced. But now, it's augmenting professionals by looking at pain points in their workflow and seeing how it can improve those. I mean, my personal view is it's never going to replace the professional, because the knowledge that you have and the feeling and the instinct that you have to have for things. I mean, you see it build up tremendously over time. As a trainee watching the partners and thinking, gosh, this is just amazing knowledge that they have that I can learn from. You're never going to replace that. I say never anyway. Let's see what happens in the next 15 years or so. But
Yeah,
very exciting areas. I mean, for me, drug discovery is another area which is tremendously exciting. I was reading about how they inputted loads of different antibiotics, and they came up with a combination that would help them against the flesh-eating disease that's been a pretty nasty thing that's been circulating around the hospitals. And that would have taken 10 years, in a lab, if they'd have had the investment even, to spend that time on it. And the AI got there quicker. So I think that's in final stages of testing at the moment. Or you've got AI that's separating different plastics, so the ones that can be recycled, the ones that can't be recycled. So I really think it's about finding that, that sweet spot of where you can make things better, and then using AI for that purpose, looking first at what it is that you do and how to make that better, rather than, oh, there's this really exciting AI and I want to just be able to use it.
yeah. Well, getting ahead of your skis is a challenge. There's that robot lawyer company, Do Not Pay, here in the US, that was fined $200,000 by the FTC for misleading consumers, as it could, draft valid legal documents for you and fight your parking fines and other cases. Everyone was very excited until they realized it didn't really promise what it deliver
Yeah.
what it promised. So yes, it's a challenge. I guess final piece of advice: how do you stay on top of these AI laws and all this change? And how can Wolters Kluwer help?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do have our legal and regulatory division and professionals that write for us and then provide updates on a wide range of laws that our customers rely on. For me, it helps that I've got a personal interest in artificial intelligence developments and technology. I go on courses. As I said, I've just successfully completed the Oxford AI program. I did the IAPP's AI governance program, and I read a lot, books that are coming out on AI and people's ideas. So I think that's one way to do it. You have to have an interest in it, because to do it just within your working hours, I think would be challenging. And then we have good trackers. We have good legal trackers. So we monitor, what's coming through I mean, it's not that you read every single document from end to end thoroughly. You might look at it and then say, well, actually, that wouldn't apply to our industry. Interesting to know that it's got similar themes and it defines AI in the same way. And then you sort of put it at the back and then you get on to the next one. And when obviously the most important one at the moment for people that are operating within Europe and who are not only selling into Europe, but exporting from Europe AI systems is to review the EU AI Act very carefully and see the extent to which they fall in it, and then look at having your AI overarching principles in place, because that's great. They should tie into your company ethics, and from there developing your AI assurance framework. And I think two of the most important things for me are multi-stakeholder involvement, because it takes a village. I really rely on our fantastic AI innovative lab and the knowledge that they have, and a lot of other great professionals across my organisation for understanding what I do. And then the other thing is to leverage off what you've got. So for those of us that have implemented and been subject to the GDPR, you've already got a certain benchmark in place, and you can use some of your existing processes from that for AI governance, some of them. So I think it's also about being very thoughtful and mindful in how you approach it. And we have time. That's the other thing. We have time. There are grace periods. So yeah, but don't spend too long, but we have time.
But time to get started. Thanks so much for your insights and the update. Fascinating, very useful. I'm sure the audience will be really intrigued by the opportunity, the challenges, and look forward to an update sometime in the future. Thanks, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Evan. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you, and thank you to your audience.
Thanks so much. And thanks, everyone, listening, watching.